הריקות של האדמיניסטרציה, וכמובן
Iran-Iraq war between 1980 and 1988 with more than 1 million fatalities had nothing to do with it, or the fact that Syria invaded Lebanon in 1976 had nothing to do with it, or the wars between South Yemen and North Yemen, and the Egyptians that fought in Yemen in the 1960s. This has nothing to do with it. The occupation of Kuwait by Saddam Hussein in 1990. But, you know, the facts are one thing and the perceptions are a different thing. But here, and it is important to explain it, that I think that this American administration is already understanding it. Everything is tied to other things as well. And this is the new approach that we've heard from the Obama administration. They say that everything is tied in with everything else. Everything is intermingled. You can't take care of one conflict only. The core of the problem today is the Iranian problem. The Iranian issue is facing first and foremost the United States, because the Iranians say very publicly that they want to push the United States out of the Middle East. They want to replace the United States in the Middle East. They want to expand their influence and undermine the secular Sunni regimes. They want, in fact, to have here a new order. Of course, well, this is the mega goal, of course, then to expand everywhere, but the means is through the nuclearization. The nuclear weapons are only the means and not the goal. The real goal is, in fact, to preempt any Western civilization's presence in the Middle East. There are only two countries that are not Muslim, that are non-Muslim countries. One of it is Lebanon, and that is why we say we see the striving towards creating a Muslim state, and we see more and more Christian emigration from Lebanon, and the Muslims that are working under the guidelines of Iran. And the second state is Israel, and the Iranians want to annihilate Israel throughout the Hezbollah, throughout Hamas, throughout the Islamic Jihad. That is why the Americans are going to understand, and I think that they are already beginning to understand, that the root of the problem is Iran. Apart from that, if we want to have any advancement vis-a-vis the Palestinians, we have to stop the Iranian influence, because the Iranians are going to do it through their emissaries here that we are all familiar with. That is why Israel should be entrepreneurial, should initiate things, and that has to start already tomorrow when Mitchell arrives here. During the first visit of the Prime Minister that is going to be elected vis-a-vis the American president in the most intensive way possible, the Prime Minister should explain the Iranian problem and the other problems in the area and try to solve those problems together. The Iranian issue should be resolved, and the sooner the better, and the Palestinian problem cannot be solved without a solution to the Iranian problem. We are not sure that the Palestinian problem will be solved, but it's for sure that if the Iranian problem is not solved, there would be no advancement in the solution of the Palestinian problem. We see it in the accrued logic, in the American interests, and also in the personae that he has chosen. For example, Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State, and other people that he has elected for his administration. These are people who, all in all, understand, people who are very talented, and people who are not going to agree to any thesis not take any thesis as something that is taken for granted. And there is a thesis, for example, there is a school in the foreign ministry that says that everything is going to be solved or should be solved through the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But I don't think that Hillary Clinton is going to agree to it. Not only because she has a credit and a reputation, and because she is opinionated, complicated, but because she has common sense. She has common sense. So I think that this is a good opportunity for the state of Israel, and also because of the reality on site. But for sure, Israel has to be initiating processes, and all in all, I'm very optimistic in terms of the U.S.-Israeli relations. And let's wait for questions, or should we entertain questions right now? The ambassador will have to leave us in a number of moments, so I will contradict what I've said before. We are going to entertain a number of questions if there are any questions. You don't have to, says the ambassador. If there are any, it seems that everything is so clear, Danny. I have a question, if I may. Listen, the Olmert government has adopted a hyper-diplomatic approach, let's call it that way. They have went even further than the Barak government in 2000 in terms of the relentless attempt at arriving at an agreement with the Palestinians. I think that the Israeli Prime Minister, he is almost the Prime Minister in Israel, despite the fact that we know that it was not very clear. And you almost created an agreement. Annapolis was almost a success. So why do you want to take now the opposite direction? You have almost arrived at the goal. How do you think that we can avoid unprecedented American pressures in terms of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, as apart from the bigger problems? First of all, the hyperactivity of the Olmert government and the Livni government is true, and I think that it is not a secret anymore. However, I had many conversations with senior people in the administration in the United States, and they also had their scruples about the Annapolis process. They, of course, agreed it, and they told me, what do you want? Bush can't be more Israeli than Olmert is. But the situation today is such that despite everything that has been done in Annapolis, despite this fact that the most pragmatic leader, I'm not saying moderate, there is a difference between being moderate and being pragmatic, of the Palestinians, Abu Mazen, does not even agree to discuss this maximalist approach that Olmert has manifested. I think that we have to explain this to the Americans as well, and this is also a certain symbol that the Americans should learn in order to understand how complicated and unsolvable the problem is. I'm not saying that they should not try to mitigate the damages and try to manage the conflict. This is a positive approach, and I really hope that the Americans would be leaders in order to give a certain security blanket. We need the Americans in order to prevent smuggling of the Hamas into the Gaza Strip. We need them in order to create a basis for economic cooperation between us and the Palestinians. I think that they can contribute a lot. By the way, I think that the Americans now, with the advent of a new administration, with all the credibility that Obama has, maybe this would be very effective in order to create a blocking group and a coalition that would enclose, that would put an enclosure on Iranian, and this has not happened in the past because of various problems, but Russia, etc. But maybe particularly under Obama, and I really believe that it's going to happen, he would be able to create an effective coalition against Iran, and he has already said it. He said that he's in favor of dialoguing with Iran, and this is a change. The political resources, American political resources, are going to be diverted towards Iran, and he said it publicly, because in the period of the elections in the United States, I wrote an article that was interpreted as if it was a critique of Obama, and in the wake of this article, his campaign made it clear that he was not going to have a dialogue with Iran, because that was the crux of the of my article, in order to drink tea with them. He would do it in order to have results. And the dialogue, and that's a very important point, which is probably going to be discussed in the conversations between us and the Americans. The dialogue with Iran should not be open-ended, because then they're going to have a dialogue until they get the bomb. That's clear. That's why there should be benchmarks, very fixed benchmarks to this dialogue. There should be a stipulation for them to suspend the enrichment of uranium before even getting into the to the negotiation table, and what should be the sanctions if they do not behave according to the expectations of the international community. There are European decisions about it, UN decisions about it, American decisions as well. So I think that an Obama administration can be very effective vis-a-vis the Iranian issue, and I think that the more he's involved in the Middle East, the more he's going to understand that this axis of Tehran, Damascus, through Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Islamic Jihad is the problem that has to be stopped. And all the other issues, I think, by default, not by design, but by default, are going to be on the back burner. We have some time for questions, but please, very brief questions. Please.
Just very quickly, a comment and then a question. No, you'll hear. The panel here is on U.S.-Israeli relations and the change in the U.S. government and how that will happen and what effect that will be in Obama. And I notice on the panel there isn't one American who really understands the elections and the election system in the United States. So I just point that out, and perhaps from an American perspective, I'd like to just ask a question, and that is this. Do you consider, for example, some of the points you raised about Obama, his election, he was so popular and so on. Obama was elected by the left wing in the United States, not by the Christian born-agains, not by others. He was elected by the left wing. It's true that, excuse me, it's true. So the question is, from that perspective, and some of the people he's already appointed as his Middle East advisors, who we're very familiar with from the last time around, Kurtzer and Dennis Ross and so on, to what extent do you think that is an indication of the positions and the policies that President Obama will take vis-a-vis the U.S., vis-a-vis Israel?
Well, first of all, thank you for this question. Let me answer for the dais. I'm a little bit insulted for saying that there are no Americans here, because you can consider me, after living there for 10 years, as you can trust that I can put myself in the shoes of the Americans and understand the intricacies and, you know, the electoral system and, you know, the different undercurrent forces they work. It is true that Obama won the primaries from the left, and he could do it because he could be very, very straightforward against the war on Iraq, and Hillary had no question to that. He did exactly what Nixon used to say, that, you know, for the primaries in the Republicans, you have to go all the way to the right, and then for the general, you go back to the center. What he did was just a mirror image. He went all the way to the left, and then came back to the center, and he was actually voted by centrists. And by the way, if you look at everything that he did, he is really governing from the center, not from any, other political persuasion. And by the way, as you know, he was under a lot of criticism from his own, liberal segments of the Democratic Party for, the priest he invited for the invocation in the swearing in from California, I just can't remember the name, and other things of reaching out. So I do think that Obama, I look at him as someone who will lead from the center. And so this is one thing. Secondly, with all the appointments, it is first of all, Dan Kurtzer and the other names are not yet, it's not yet official. We know of course, Hillary Clinton. We know of Daniel Shapiro. Now recently is going to replace Elliot Abrams. We know of Rahm Emanuel, of course. But I think the one which will be most influential here will be Obama himself and Hillary Clinton. They will be the leaders, and I believe that they are the ones which could look at things with really open mind. And in that respect, I second my things that I said, that the relations will continue to grow and will continue to be very good.
Well, I just want to add from the dais, the management just submitted some additional information. Since you mentioned Dan Kurtzer's co-author, Dr. Scott Liszewski, who he and Professor Kurtzer just wrote a book some months ago on U.S.-Israel relations, will be joining us. He's coming from another event, and he is a senior fellow of the U.S. Institute of Peace. He's sort of on the way, probably stuck in traffic on the way to here. So you
good.
So hear that America, you're off the hook completely.
I return my American passport, right. And I resume my Israeli one. Okay,
that's right.
I apologize if I didn't mean anything.
We have time for one short question, and then I'm going to ask Professor Gilboa to enlighten us from his standpoint.
האם לנוכח החסר הכלכלי שפוקדת ארצות הברית לא יכולה להתרחש שם רדיקליזציה קשה?
Shouldn't there be a severe radicalization there which might overturn all your analyses and cause the US to start behaving radically? No, I don't think so. We have to understand the structure of American society thoroughly and the strength of the economy as well. Despite the crisis, which is indeed the toughest crisis that we have seen since the 1930s, still, I greatly believe in an economy of 12 or 13 trillion dollars a year that they can definitely afford to invest or lose 1 trillion or more without collapsing. I think that's certainly on the chart of possibilities. And beyond that, I think we must remember that the American society is, after all, very healthy, very dynamic. And it is true that there might be a danger of some kind of American convergence and looking inwards in order to deal with the crisis. And I'm certain that most of the time, most of Obama's time will be devoted to the economic crisis, as well as Iraq. He, after all, promised during his campaign to withdraw the army. And it's not just a matter of saying to the army about face and they go out. It's a matter of diplomatic negotiations within Iraq and with its neighbors. So the attention will be divided between or among many arenas, which could come eventually at the expense of, the Palestinian issue is only one of an entire gamut of problems, both internally and externally, that with all the energies devoted, I think that we can say that relative to other issues, it is not the #1 problem for the American policymakers. But concerning the economic issue, or your question, I have no doubt that America will emerge from this crisis. It might take 1 or 2 or 3 years, I don't know, but it will not have any effect, just as the 1930s had no effect, and America didn't become radical, and the economy there was even weaker than it is now, much weaker. And we must remember that one of the engines of growth in America is all those innovations, and America is still investing in research and development far more than all the European states put together, and Russia and everybody. So once the credit crunch, this in fact crisis of trust in the banks, in between them and within them, once they drain all those toxic assets, to some government company or another, we will see growth, even accelerated growth. I'm optimistic about that as well. Anyone who thought that the 21st century will be Chinese or Japanese century after the 20th century was American and the 19th century was European, I think will be disappointed, because I still believe in the leadership of the US. The US is strong not only from the point of view of the economy and technology and the military, but also its ethics, its internal ethos, and the way the Americans see themselves. And it is a fact that the US is still attracting more immigration. People still want to go to America, not anywhere else, including China. Thank you very much.
East, and they have already flooded us with bleak prophecies and threats and scenarios of catastrophes. But the truth is that, as Scott has just said, it is very difficult to know right now where Obama is going to lead us. Of course, he has a world view. He has principles which he upholds concerning foreign policy in general, and the American policy in the Middle East is particularly, and he has already done some things such as the appointment of George Mitchell as his special envoy to the Israeli-Palestinian issue. On the other hand, you also have the reality. He is going to discover slowly what the limitations are on the abilities to fulfill the wishes of the United States in the Middle East and in the Israeli-Palestinian arena. There are the political arena in the United States, and there is also another election campaign in 4 years from now, and he would like to be re-elected. So there are those ideal things that he would like to achieve. He would like to achieve a total arrangement that would be named after him, and he's not the first president who has tried to do it, and all his predecessors have failed in a certain way. Let me say one more thing which is very important if we want to understand Obama's policy. He is surprising, especially in terms of his appointments, and that is why whatever we are going to say here and all the expectations that we may raise will probably bring us to a surprise, and we're going to be surprised anyway, because he's new and you don't know who he is, and from this point of view the suspicions in Israel, or the fears from Obama and George Mitchell are justified, because they stem from unfamiliarity with the people, with those people, and in times of uncertainty you are also afraid. What I can say in a general way is that Obama is going to do the opposite of what Bush had done, and Bush had done the opposite of what Clinton had done before him. And with Obama, it's much more significant, and because he comes from the opposing party, so he would probably turn upside down whatever the Republicans have been doing, and also the ability to create big changes was his main slogan in the elections campaign, and it actually created his success and his victory in the election. So changes should be made, and I'll point at a number of the general tendencies of these changes. So first of all, talking generally about the general principles of the foreign policy, of course he's talking about a focus about the transition from power to diplomacy, or the integration of power and diplomacy. Hillary Clinton is using now something that we have developed in the theory of international relations, which is called the smart power. This is a combination of military power and economic power, but also power, soft power, as it's called, of convincing, influencing, and attraction